Hello, class. I'm sorry I cannot be there today. We have a social studies meeting. That's why Ms. Byrne and Mr. Smith and I are not here today. What you're due now should be finished and should be collected. So let's start with our new chapter, which is the post-classical chapter and the movement of people. Right now, our substitute, which is most likely the really excellent sub, Mr. Ask, you may take our packets and pass those out. This is what the packets look like, and those could be passed out right now. Make sure the first thing you do is get your name on those as those are being passed out. All right, so as those are being passed out, again, our chapter is Post-Classical Movement of People. Our essential question for this chapter is, how were the migrations of the Vikings, Bantu, and the Polynesians similar and different from each other? And so similar and different, so we are going to be writing a comparison essay. And we'll have a topic organizer for this as well as usual. All right, our objective for today, students will be able to, that's you, identify who the Vikings were and explain what happened during their migrations. All right, we got a lot to do. Our do now is done. Our first thing we're going to do is take notes on the context. Now that our do now is done, that is number 2. So, on your work, on your packet right here, where it says context of the chapter and era, here is where you'll be taking notes. I'm going to give an explanation of what context is, kind of a lecture, so have your pencils ready, and let's begin. All right, first off, migration. Now, migration, we've talked about already. This map right here should look pretty familiar to you. This map was from the Foundations era, and this was the map when humans migrated and went all over the world. How we said humans started in Africa, then they spread out, the out of Africa theory, to Europe, Asia, Australia, to the Americas, and migrated all over the world. So migration is basically the movement of people. Migration is the movement of people. Often it can be across countries, it can be across borders, and migration has been going on as long as there have been humans. So humans have been migrating and moving from place to place for our entire history. We often settle in places and live there for a while, but also there's lots of movement. The connection to today with migration. Migration also happens today. Here we see a boat, and these would be refugees who are leaving the country of Syria because of the war that's been going on there, the fighting with ISIS, or the Islamic State that's been going on there. So many refugees from Syria are fleeing their homes and going to places in Europe where there is more stability. So migration is the movement of people. This is our context of what's going on in the world, migration. So migration is the movement of people, which we will be talking about in this chapter. I've given you 2 examples, one that we've already learned about, a text connection to the past. This is a text connection to today with migration from Syrian refugees. One last one for today you can also think about is we've had a large immigration from Mexico and Central America to the United States. That's also migration or movement of people. So it can be movements across a border, across the country, but again, migration is the movement of people. Now let's take it to our time period. We are in the post-classical era. So we're going to talk about migration or the movement of people in the post-classical era. So if we get an optic, if it says context, remember the context is migration of people in the post-classical era. So let's look at what's been going on in the post-classical era that we've learned about so far. So think about that for a minute. What have we learned about? Well, we've learned about trade in the post-classical era. We learned about the Afro-Eurasian trade networks, the Trans-Saharan trade network. We learned about the Silk Road and the Indian Ocean. There's actually some movement going on there. We learned how the Mongols controlled a lot of trade in the post-classical era as they built their big empire. We've learned about how the Muslims also built their large empire with trade. So some migration that's going on in this period has to do with trade. So some migration in the post-classical period has to do with trade. Let's also look at migration that's going on through three different groups. The three main groups we'll be talking about who move a lot in this chapter and settle in new places to live and affect the world are the Vikings, who move mostly in northern Europe all the way to the Americas. Then we have the Polynesians, who make a huge migration in the Pacific Ocean to many different islands. And lastly, our migration will be the Bantu, who go from West Africa to most of what's called sub-Saharan Africa. So the Vikings, the Polynesians, and the Bantu are three groups of people who will be migrating or moving to live in new places in our post-classical era. That is the context of our chapter. So why don't you turn and talk now with the person next to you for about 1 minute and go over your notes. You can add a few things while you're doing this too, and explain to the person next to you and maybe write a few notes down. What is the context of this chapter and era? Go ahead, Mr. Ask, could you please press pause for 1 minute? Oh. Now that our video is, now we've gone over the context, we're going to go over our video. So now what you're going to do is you're going to watch a short video on the Vikings, take notes the best you can, and you're going to have a turn and talk. Your turn and talk when the video is done is going to be right here. What were the impact of the Vikings' voyages? So you want to know the big picture is what is the impact that the Viking voyages had. So go ahead, have your pencils ready to take notes, and Mr. Ask, if you could start that video, go ahead. All right, now that that video is done, why don't you go ahead and do your turn and talk and write a few notes on what were the impact of the Viking voyages. You may do that now. All right, class, before we go any further, let me just let you know what your homework is going to be. You are going to need to do the readings for this packet. So that means starting here in Vikings, and you need to be done all the way to right here where it says take notes in the following video. We're going to watch that video tomorrow. So in the boxes, take notes and do the readings. I noticed when I was correcting the last ones that some of you guys just wrote in the boxes, highlighted. That is not enough. If you highlight, you still need to write notes. So if you are not highlighting, I would say I'm estimating that for you to have somewhere between 7 to 10 notes in each box if you are not highlighting. If you are highlighting, I'm either expecting you to have 4 to 5 notes written somewhere along the words here or in the box. Writing highlight in here will not be enough if you just highlight. That will not be enough. You do need to have some written notes as well. So your homework is to finish all of the readings. But let's do the first part here right now. Let's do this. Mr. Ask, if you could walk around, I will allow the students to read on their own. They can read the first section here. If you have a highlighter, go ahead and take it out. You can write some notes in the box. You can write some notes on the side. Again, 7 to 10 if you're not highlighting, 4 to 5 if you are highlighting or underlining. Why don't you take a few minutes, Mr. Ask, walk around and make sure that they are reading the first section. If you get done with the first section, go on to the next one because that's going to be your homework anyway. So go ahead and you may begin doing your reading now. Also, one more thing before you start doing your reading. I almost forgot. Make sure for your reading you get all this done, because tomorrow when I come back for the Do Now, I will be checking that the notes are done. And it will be your first grade of Session 4. So if you get a 4.0, go ahead and show your parents that you have a 4.0 for Session 4. So make sure you get this done. I'll be checking tomorrow. Go ahead, Mr. Ask, and assign the first section of reading. You may begin now. Okay, now that you are done, or most of you are done, what you may do now is compare and share your notes and your highlights with the person you are sitting next to. If you can do it quietly, you'll get a little more time. Why don't you take about 2 minutes to get that done? Mr. Ask, if you can push pause, and go ahead, students, and get that done. All right, sophomores, let's do this. I don't know how much time is left, but probably not that much in class. Why don't we take the rest of the time for the ticket out to have you continue reading on your own, taking notes, and get us started on your homework. We'll do that for the ticket out. Make that for the ticket out today. So go ahead and read your readings and do your best. Make sure your homework is done. I will be checking it tomorrow when I get back. Thanks for being such a great class. I can't wait to see you guys tomorrow.